What's going on, everybody? One of the things that I spend a lot of time looking at, but also my own time researching, reading about, studying, and watching is about the grading companies. I've talked a lot about grading companies, specifically PSA and SGC, because those are the two biggest graders of vintage cards, which is my preference of what I tend to collect. Now, one of the things that I'm always doing is I'm always keeping my ear to the ground about anything new, any new information, any coming information about those two grading companies. And one of the things that I think SGC has been really, really good about, besides just their customer service, is their CEO. Their company leaders have been very visible. They've been on YouTube channels. They've been on, Chasing Cardboard episodes. And when you have your poster child of your company out and about, that provides transparency. And I think that the amount that we've seen the heads of other companies like SGC out and about is starting to force PSA to do the same. Again, this is why I'm all about competition. We want to be rooting for multiple good grading companies so there's competition and they force each other to be better for us. Well, recently, Nat Turner, the head of PSA, did an interview. And he did an interview with a YouTuber. And a lot of you might be thinking, well, why didn't I see this? Why didn't I know this happened? Well, the reason is because the YouTuber is a Pokemon collector. He's a Pokemon card YouTuber. But I watched the interview. The interview was over an hour long. And an overwhelming amount of it related to all collectors. And a lot of the examples that he used during the interview was about sports cards, because that continues to be the bread and butter of PSA. And some of the things that he said on this channel, I think it's really, really important that we all hear and that we all know. So what I did is I went through that interview and I pulled out the parts that I thought were the most relevant and the most important for you all to hear. So what I'm going to be doing over the next few minutes is showing you clips of his answers, of his responses, of his news, of his updates with the company, some of which I didn't know were happening. And I'm guessing a lot of you didn't know were happening, but I think it's good to know that it's happening. I'll tell you this right off the bat. My takeaway was a lot of good stuff about PSA, but a couple of things that really, really concerned me. I think any PSA collector really needs to see this video. And I think any SGC collector or Beckett BGS collector needs to see it as well, because when the leader of the industry, which PSA is clearly the leader, they're 10x the number of grading cards each month of number 2 SGC, it affects everybody. I really encourage you to watch this. I think there are some things in here that are going to surprise you, that are going to impress you, and are going to concern you. First off, a quick synopsis of Nat Turner telling us about the fact of he's actually a sports card collector himself, and a short clip of his experience and his background with collecting. Check that out.
I've been a card collector my whole life. I started collecting cards probably and I was 5 or 6 years old, and really started getting more into it like fifth grade. I started doing shows like as a dealer, like even in seventh, eighth grade. Like my dad and I made like the display table and stuff, the booth. And then I got really into grading in 2012, 13. I was buying everything graded, but I started grading my own stuff in 2013, 14.
Now, were you going with PSA or were you dabbling between PSA and Beckett?
Both. Yeah, very
Okay.
much both. Most of my collection was Beckett because I collect modern basketball cards mostly,
Hmm.
90s, which at the time was mostly Beckett. And then I did vintage baseball, which is almost all PSA. And so I had very much both. But I started getting really into set collecting around 2015, 16, mainly vintage baseball and 90s basketball, trying to like PMG greens, PMG reds, that kind of stuff. And my mom wheeled out my childhood card collection, was like, here, these are yours now. And I hadn't seen them in 30 years or
Yeah.
something, probably 25 years. And it gave me this inspiration to actually, oh, well, maybe my next thing should be in cards, actually. So that summer, which is the COVID, like the first year of COVID 2020, I committed mentally to do something in cards. And to me, the most important company in cards, like manufacturers come and go, like just to me is grading. And
Yeah.
at the time, PSA had become my grading company of choice, and it was that or nothing. I was looking at other stuff, but it was really that or nothing. So put together a group, and I couldn't afford to be the whole company. It
Yeah.
was a big number, but put together a group, and yeah.
All right. So that's him. That's his background in collecting. And that's kind of how he became the CEO and the face of PSA. Now, one of the things that a lot of us have been thinking and feeling and talking about is that PSA has changed their standards. And and to this point, Nat Turner has clearly said, no, we haven't changed any standards. We're doing things the same. Not that long ago, I talked about how they've included some new AI software, some new systems where computerized scans and images are being utilized. And that might be part of the reason that it feels like the grades have gotten harder. Now, this interviewer, he asked specifically to Nat Turner about pack grading. But his answer is concerning. His answer is not what a lot of us want to hear. And I'm assuming that something that they're doing with pack grading is probably something that they're doing with all sorts of grading. So check this out.
Has PSA changed their pack grading standards? Because it seems like some of the packs that have been graded recently have become a little bit harsher. Like in the past, no one kind of knew even what a PSA 7 or PSA 6 graded pack even looked like. Like it was only 8s, 9s, or 10s, but now we're starting to see those lower grades.
Yeah, we haven't changed the standards. I'll tell you, we take foil pack grade. And by the way, I collect most of the packs I collect are foil packs, like 90s basketball foil
Okay.
packs. So I have a full appreciation for it. I just got back in order, and yeah, I got like, I think I submitted 50 packs from 1997 Topps Chrome, and I think the highest I got I got like 2 9s, and most were 8s and 7s. I think we're just taking it very seriously. I mean, I don't think the standards have changed. I think we're just being, we're applying the standards maybe more consistently, than before.
Huh? The standard hasn't changed. You're just applying the standards more consistently? Did he just say their standards haven't changed? They're just applying the standards more consistently. Is that troubling to anybody else?
Um, when you look at foil packs, and we're doing a lot of this in the California office now, actually, foil pack grading. There's actually more than people realize that go into
The
it.
potential of pack grading standards getting changed, there's like a little part of me like, uh-oh.
No, it's not. Like I said, it's not changing. We're just being much more consistent in applying the standards.
It's not changing. We're just being more consistent with applying the standards. Isn't that changing?
We're just being much more consistent in applying the standards,
Okay.
but not in a way that should have resulted in a major, grade change at all.
In a major grade change? And it shouldn't have resulted in a major grade change. Maybe a minor grade change. But a grade change. So far, he has come across to me as a very likable guy, a very down-to-earth guy. But he's kind of contradicting himself here. And to me, it's kind of important what he's saying. And I know he's talking about packs. But if they're enforcing more consistency with enforcing what the standards are for packs, isn't it kind of safe to assume they might be doing that with cards?
I hear you. Like I said, we're putting more and more resources into pack grading, especially foil pack grading.
Yeah.
In California with, we're training new folks. I was actually there a couple weeks ago talking to the team about it. I mean, it is an extremely fast growing category for PSA pack grading, especially foil pack grading. So I think it's just us, being much more, rigorous. Not that we weren't before, but like we just more training, more QA, more verification, that sort of thing. So
no major changes, just, more training and more rigorous and more Q&A. But, no major changes and nothing that should result in any major changes in grades. Again, I applaud him for coming on and talking about this topic and being willing to answer the question. But the way that question was asked concerns me. A lot of what he's about to say and the rest of the interview, I think, is really good news for the most part. So check that out.
And one of the things that your competitors have, especially Beckett, is they do have that black label. Now, I was watching some lives in the past with you on, and you said you have talked about potentially having a grade higher than the Gem Mint 10, which that scares me to death because I don't want to see that. But are those real conversations you have had at PSA, potentially doing like a higher 10?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a higher grade. It would be a subset of 10, but no, it's not something that's in our near-term plans.
This is really important here. It's not in their near-term plans to add a black label or a higher level 10 grade. It's not in their near-term plans. He didn't say no. He said it's not in their near-term plans. So anybody out there who has a 10 grade card, just know that PSA doesn't have in their near-term plans of adding another level or category of 10 that's higher than the current level 10.
We've what I've said before is true. We've had prototypes like, hey, what would it look like? Like a good example is the 86 Fleer Michael Jordan PSA 10s, number 57. Like those cards, there's 320 of them, PSA 10s. You do not technically have to have 50-50 centering top, bottom, left, right, front, and back to qualify as a 10 in PSA's grading standards. And that's a card where like left to right is pretty much always the issue, centering. And that's a card, I know this is a Pokemon channel, but I'll just give you this example. That's an example of a card where like, yeah, in theory, PSA could look at it and say, sure, this is, 50-50, blah, blah, blah. And then like, maybe it's the top 1% or top 10% of the 10s we designate as being perfect or whatever.
So it's not in their near-term plans, but they have done a prototype and they have talked about the idea of, instead of 48-52, which would be qualifying as a 10, there might be a different category at exactly 50-50 in the centering. But don't worry, it's not in their near-term plans. So if you're somebody out there who has a PSA 10 of a card that you spent a ton of money for, because in theory, there would never be one that's better than that 10. Sleep well tonight because it's not in their near-term plans.
Not something we're thinking about launching, but again, like in a hypothetical academic approach, yes, that is absolutely something you could do with the higher pop 10s if people had a desire to distinguish between them. We see it happen anyway in the market. Like you go on eBay, you go on wherever, Heritage, et cetera, like you will see the better ones sell for more than, in the same grade.
Yeah, those strong versus weak 10s. Yeah, you see it all the time.
Yeah, and like you see the eye appeal stuff. I know there's other things being out, NBA and other stickers. Like we're kind of letting the market decide, that for now. I don't think we want to be in the business, as you said, of like, is there a better 10 or whatever? And
yeah,
PSA.
no, I'm hoping you guys don't ever go that
Yeah.
way, but I've heard you in other lives mention them. Like,
But look,
like,
we're open to innovating and mixing things up. I mean, but we're very thoughtful about doing any of that stuff. We're very aware that we have tens of millions of cars out there that have already been graded, and the last thing we want to do is affect the value of things out there. So unless it's extremely warranted, for future hobbyists and collectors. But again, it's not something we're doing. So
the good news is he started to back off a little bit, right? He started saying, at the very end, he says, this is not something we're doing. I don't know if that means it's not something we're doing now and will never do, because he just said before that, unless it's something that, is important to the hobby and is warranted for the hobby. And, so when I'm hearing this, when I'm watching this, when I'm keeping my ear to the ground and I hear something like this, I mean, as an advocate for all of us collectors, I think it's something we should know, that this appears to be on the table for PSA. Now, he did say we're not doing it, but he also said we have prototypes. He also said it would look like this. He also said it would be a different category of 10. If I had a big money card and a PSA 10 holder, personally, the last 3 minutes would be concerning for me. And I think that, you would want to know that too, which is why I'm sharing it.
Yeah. Well, one thing we will do, and I'll tell you, I mean, I've talked about this before. I mean, we intend to have more and more information available on that cert lookup page. Things like you can imagine, like we are adding like date graded. It's just it's hard, believe it or not, when you have like 30 years of databases, you have to figure out how to combine and pull from. And
now this is something that I've been calling for. A lot of us who feel that some of the grading at PSA has gotten more difficult, and we now know that PSA is being more deliberate about enforcing and ensuring their standards of grading packs, at least. Maybe other things too, though that was not mentioned. They're now going to start including more information in the website for PSA when you look the card up from the serial number. And one of the things that he just said that they're planning on doing is including when the card was graded. So if you believe that a card that was graded in 1999 is not as strict as a card that was graded in 2023, soon in the database on PSA's website, it's going to say when the card was graded. And he just said, yeah, the reason it's taking a while is because we have lots of different databases with 30 years worth of information to compile. So we're not talking about from this point forward, it would be included. Sounds to me like he's saying they're going back right now and compiling every card that was graded to include when it was graded. That's a big revelation, in my opinion. If they're going to start making that information public, that's a big deal.
but that's an example. Another example could be centering. You know, like we actually do automate the measurement calculation of centering.
Oh, okay.
People don't really realize that, but you know, yes, we have graders looking at it and confirming, but you know, we do have a AI system, if you will, that detects centering, and you know, that's something I could see us putting on the, you know, as metadata on a verification page. Like, you know, if you're curious, you don't want to pull the ruler out yourself. Oh yeah, it's 58-42 left, right. You know, great.
Oh, that would be real interesting if you guys did that.
Now, this is something a lot of us have been calling for. A lot of us have been calling for more transparency and some information from PSA about why a card got a certain grade. And what he's saying right now is on the database, on the information page, when you look a card up, instead of just seeing the picture and the serial number and the grade, now they're talking about adding to that the date it was graded all the way back to the beginning, and also what is the exact centering based on the AI software program that they're using, which he just said they're using AI software to help them determine the exact grading, the exact centering. That, to me, is probably a good step in the right direction for transparency.
We're thinking about it. Like, again, we're doing more, and we have a roadmap of things we want to include on that. Again, super thoughtful about each one because they all have implications.
Yeah.
Can't guarantee any of it, but you know, that's kind of stuff we're thinking about.
So again, this is over an hour-long interview. I'm pulling out the clips that I think are very, very relevant to the overwhelming majority of the collecting community. And those changes, I think some of that is a good thing. I want to know when a card was graded if I'm about to buy it. I want to know the exact centering of a card that I'm thinking about buying. And PSA is now saying, he just said, they're really thinking about adding this to the information page when you look a card up. I think that's a good thing. And I also think it's a good thing that he has now said a couple of times that they're being very deliberate and they're being very thoughtful to the fact that they don't want to affect values of people's collections. And doing some of these things could affect the values. So they're being very thoughtful of that, and they are keeping that in mind. Again, I think that is a good thing. Let's see what he has to say next.
So what are your thoughts just on AI grading in general? Like, obviously you're dabbling it with using it as more or less a centering tool, but you always need that human element. At least that's where I come from. I've heard you talk about it on past lives. Like, you're also sort of a believer in that you always need to have some set of human eyes looking at those cards.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in. I think you can do it. I mean, I think I've seen it with my own eyes. Like, sure, you can put a card into a, scanner and grade it. I get the technology. I'm a tech guy myself. Like, I understand it. Yeah. As far as PSA goes, my belief, I don't think we have no intention of being fully automated. We're going to take the approach of tech assisted human grading. Let's say 5 years ago it was 100% human. I think if we're inching our way towards 90-10 and then 80-20, et cetera, but never replacing the human element, look, I'm a card guy too. Like, holding a card, this is gonna sound weird, but like the smell of the card, the feel of the card,
I know exactly.
Yeah, the surface, like you can, especially with vintage, it's just not. I don't think it's smart to grade it fully automated. But our plan is to do tech assisted human grading. So we intend absolutely, like I was saying on the cert verification page, to provide tools to the research and grading teams that make their job, I would say, more efficient, easier, but frankly better, because they can do what they're best at, which is determine grade and authenticity with little, recommendations. Like, for example, hey, the system noticed that this card resembles a fake counterfeit that was submitted 6 years ago. Look for, like in Pokemon, look for the stamp, that is maybe
Make sure it's in the right spot. Yeah.
Yeah, like we could detect, like Desert Shield's a good example in baseball, like the palm tree. Like we have tons of knowledge at PSA on all these counterfeits. That's just an example of something technology can do to assist the grading team.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this is very important. He's admitting right now, he's saying we are using AI technology. But he's also saying that there is going to be human grading. So it's going to be tech-assisted human grading. The tech assisting should make things more consistent, which I think is a good thing. I think the technology being able to tell the grader the exact centering on the card or the exact tilt on the card, I think is a good thing. The fact that the software technology can help prevent counterfeits, I think is a good thing. But it's still different than how they used to do it. And if it's different, it could be harder. It could be easier, which affects how good the card really is and how accurate the grade really is. To me, this is important. This is really important. And that's why them sharing when a card was graded and on the information page sharing the date it was graded, I think is going to become a very, very important piece of information for a lot of collectors when determining how much they want to pay for a card. Although, again, the best judge of what we want and how nice something is our own eyes. We have to buy what we like. Let's keep watching.
And speaking of set collector and in like the PSA registry, I know you guys have really been pushing big into the PSA registry and especially pushing in, you guys are now doing all the reward systems. Is that something you guys are still just looking to really grow into the future, that PSA registry?
Yeah. The set registry, to be honest, is the lifeblood of PSA. It's like I said before, it's mostly dominated by sports collectors. It's an imbalance. We have some TCG Pokemon set collectors in there, not more than a few, but it's probably the most popular thing I can think of at PSA when it comes to sports cards. Like we have tens of thousands of people every day logging into that system or in the mobile app, the set registry mobile app.
So SGC people, the really good news is if you're baseball collector Mike Moynihan subscribed, which you should be if you're not, he interviewed the CEO at SGC and he all but said that the SGC set registry is really close. And you just heard from the PSA CEO that the set registry at PSA is their lifeblood and the most important thing to the company. So just imagine when SGC comes out with their set registry and the way that the CEO was talking about it to Mike Moynihan is it sounds like it's going to be a top of the line set registry when it drops. That's a good thing for SGC people.
It'll soon be integrated with the PSA Vault, actually. So when you buy a card and put it in the vault, it's instant ownership, possession. So you can instantly add it to your sets if it's in your vault account, as an example. So we've got a lot of stuff coming on that.
Okay, so this next thing he's going to say, I think is really, really important. It's about some changes to their modern card slabs. And it's something that they're about to start expanding into other sectors of card grading. But their slab is changing. And for the most part, the things that they are changing about it, I think sound pretty positive. So let's hear what the changes in the slab are that are coming and have already started for modern cards?
We do have some really cool ideas. I mean, there are dozens of things in our slabs that both covert and overt that, you may or may not realize that, like, but the problem is only PSA really knows these things.
Yeah.
It's like we want to train, the end consumer collector to know these things too. Not everything, because we want things to be covert where, only we have the key to determine if the slab is real. We have a lot of cool ideas. And we very quietly, it's probably the first time I've publicly talked about it, we very quietly have rolled out a new slab. It looks the same. You probably haven't noticed. It's not for Pokemon, so it's probably the wrong audience, but for modern sports cards, it's an entirely new slab, but it looks the same. It's 20% heavier. It's better plastic, harder to counterfeit perfectly. We can tell the difference. Like when we see one, we're like, oh, like obviously it's not the same. But there's a lot of new features in this slab that, we have under, particular lighting, for example, that we know it's the real one. The customer benefits are better UV protection. It's harder to crack. Like you could run your car over it. We actually had someone on Twitter the other day. His dad literally ran over the PSA sub box and the slab didn't crack.
Wow.
And, absolutely would have, like, and if you crack, like you could, if you take a hammer to an old slab, it like could shatter. This new slab, it's much more permeable.
Yeah.
You'll notice the difference. If you start cracking some of these new ones, please don't. But if you did, you would notice the improvement.
So a lot of us don't think that PSA is listening, but they're clearly listening. This is a more durable plastic that they are starting using with modern cards. It is harder to crack. It is harder to counterfeit, and it has better UV protection. That's really good news for PSA people. That's really good news. I think that it's great that they're doing that. Harder to counterfeit, harder to crack, harder to have the sun damage it. That's all great stuff, right? Let's keep watching.
As part of these slab upgrades, we're doing a bunch of security features. We've got some really cool stuff coming though, for sure.
Yeah, and especially that I'm real interested in that UV protection too, because I know that's like a complaint for a lot of people is that slabs offer very, very little, if any, UV protection right now. So to have an increased UV protection, you're not going to tell anyone stick this by your window and let the sun shine on it, but to have a little bit of that will be nice. And the fact that and you said you wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. So even though the plastic's maybe a better quality, a little bit heavier, they're still going to stack on your old slabs the same. There's going to be no difference. There.
That's the thing. They look the point was we didn't want to make old slabs worth less or whatever. We upgraded the plastic. They're actually, you to the naked, like to the untrained eye, it's the same thing. But I'll promise me, if you take 10 cards in a new order, put them on a scale next to the old order, and like they're going to be
that much heavier, huh?
20% heavier. That's because it's a higher grade plastic. It's more expensive for us. That's fine. We took a lot of feedback in from collectors that they wanted, a higher quality plastic. I'll tell you another benefit of them is that they're less prone to damaging cards. Like, it's very rare, but we do have these things called pixel damage, where over time a card if it can move at all, which you want a little movement in a slab, if there's even a tiny, tiny, tiny little imperfection in the plastic slab inside of it, in theory, it could create a scratch on a card. This does happen with Pokemon. These new slabs, they're so much smoother and higher quality that it frankly eliminates the risk of what we call pixel damage. It's more of an issue with Chrome cards, like Chrome basketball cards and baseball cards and stuff. But, we do see it, Now,
this last question, I think, is a really great question. And it's something I think a lot of us have never understood about why some orders turn over fast and some orders turn over slow. When we submit an order to PSA and the amount of time it takes to come back compared to another order that we submit to PSA and how long that one takes to come back. And the answer makes perfect sense. And so check this out.
Why is it sometimes when we submit cards to PSA, like if we have a submission a week apart, sometimes one of those submissions magically like starts to go through the grading process a little bit faster than
Yeah.
the one the week before. Is that just an internal thing on your guys, or?
There's so many factors. It's hard to explain. I'll try my best, but it's not perfectly first in, first out, because some orders are bigger than others. People aren't willing to admit this, but sometimes when you submit cards, you have a card. You may not realize it, but that one card is more complicated to grade or more complicated to slab, or any part of the process is more complicated. Maybe it's too big, maybe it's too small. And our orders move as an order. So when it's like a snake, the mouse goes in and it gets digested, it comes out. You can't take out one card. You can't, everything moves with an order. For example, if you have a card that's autographed, guess what? It has to get autograph authenticated. It's as if it's being graded twice. Okay. So there's all these things. We call them edge cases, but in reality, almost every order has an edge case. So therefore, it's not really an edgy thing, right? It's every order has complexity. Some days we can grade smaller card orders faster. Some days we say, you know what, we're going to do, we got behind on 500 card bulk orders. We're going to crank those out this week, right? There's just so much complexity and diversity in what people submit. Yeah. And we take it very seriously. So if a card requires lamination, if it's too small we don't want it moving around the holder, that adds, potentially weeks because there's, only so many people that are trained to do that. So that's really the answer. It's kind of it depends, but I get this, it's probably my most common complaint, but I would say 99 out of 100 times when I ask and I look at what the order is, I'm like, oh, well, it's because you have, this one card, and it could just be a standard size card, but guess what? It may have common counterfeit, risk. And, we have an extra set of eyes look at it internally. We have all these flags set up in our system where it's like, oh, you submitted this card, such and such needs to look at this card before it's passed. That kind of thing. And so that's the way we viewed it. I mean, technology investment was very underwhelming for decades plus at the company. Rightfully so. It wasn't no one, I think, pre-COVID would have expected this level of scale and complexity, and the industry just blew up as well, which demands, collectors demand more services, images, better set registry, mobile app, like all these things, and the counterfeit detection, whatever. And, PSA didn't have that level of budget prior. And we basically said, you know what, we're comfortable being less profitable in return for getting more engineers and software folks that can actually make these things happen.
Yeah. All right. What do you think? There's some things in there that, in my opinion, are a little bit concerning that he said, if you're a PSA person. There are other things he said that were in there that I thought were really good news if you're a PSA person. What's your takeaway? What's your key takeaway here from this interview? Now, I will post a link to the full interview down below in the description if you would like to watch the whole thing. And it is a good interview, but there's a lot of stuff in there that is geared specifically to Pokemon collectors, which I know that most of us aren't. And so I pulled out the pieces that I thought were the most interesting and that were applied to all of us as sports card collectors. Really, really interesting interview, and it just happened a few days ago. This is not old information. This happened in the last 10 days or so. So this is current information directly from Nat Turner's mouth. Give me your thoughts.